Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit. In this episode, I'd like to create some space at the end of the month of May to return to some of the themes that came through at the beginning of the month, which were really centered around the idea of self-honesty, and to deepen our contemplations together based on what life has been presenting me throughout the month. So, something I've been thinking about from the start of the month is this idea that self-honesty is sometimes challenging because many of us have been taught to shape our expressions in order to fit the needs of others, and by extension, to secure our belonging and good standing with others. Some of these habitual patterns can be quite small, they can be very subtle, and yet as we deepen our awareness of these habitual patterns, we can begin to cultivate an understanding of how they contribute to an overall blockage and distortion of our true expressions as they are arising in the present moment, and perhaps even through that awareness beginning to unravel some of these habitual patterns and seeing how that contributes to our overall sense of freedom of expression. And one of the reasons why these small habitual patterns can make it very challenging to be honest with ourselves is they enforce a really subtle belief that there's something wrong when our true responses, our true impulses are happening in the moment that they're happening. That as these responses may be a tiny mark of anger or annoyance or tiredness is coming up, we label them as a threat, however subconsciously or unconsciously. I have this experience with one of my mentors that have been shedding some light on my own patterns, which is the propensity to make other people's responses a reflection of my own qualities and my own inherent goodness, which conceptually, I know not to be true, but somehow in my body can feel very challenging if I don't continually come at this pattern from a more aware mental space, with the orientation to try to investigate them further. So this specific mentor, I deeply admire them for their ability to express anger and annoyance without distortion at any given moment. At first, it took me by surprise. Some of these expressions are not overblown or large by any stretch of the imagination, but they are sometimes coming out of nowhere, and they are often in response to my innocent self-expression. That there are these ways of being that maybe sometimes I laugh at something that they said, and their immediate response was, "What's so funny about that?" In a way that's kind of confrontational, right? And at first, I was kind of rattled, honestly, because I've been so used to being self-reflective when someone responds in a way that I didn't expect, or that didn't fall squarely into the parameter of what I consider safe or what I consider good. And over time, I learned to appreciate that this is just part of their aliveness. This is part of who they are, part of how they see the world and how they respond to the world. This isn't something that the two of us needed to tiptoe around, but rather something to witness and to make space around. And I also learned that I don't have to be scared. Or if I were scared, I can express that, "Ooh, whoa, that response you just had kind of rattled me. That was kind of abrupt. I was just laughing because something happened within me. I don't know. I can't describe it to you. I can't explain it to you." And then we can just move on. And this is very instructive for me, because all my life I have found it very challenging to allow my own nervous system to be okay with other people having a response that is outside the realm of what I would consider safe, or what I would consider reflecting back to me that I am in good standing with them. And so I've been asking myself this question of, where am I shaping my expressions according to some anticipatory fears of how others would be impacted by me? Where am I using other people's raw, in the moment expressions to perpetuate some old stories about how I am inadequate, rather than using the responses that are happening in the moment, whether that's my response or the other person's response, simply as a gauge of resonance? And even when there's maybe a mismatch of resonance between two people, we can still use that as a launching pad for conversations, as a launching pad for potentially opening the portal to deeper understanding, deeper conversations, deeper embracing of one another's true nature. Usually when anger or annoyance comes up, that is a surface reaction, right? That tells us that there is something underneath that is a true mismatch, that how I am or how I respond to situations is different than how they would respond. And difference does not mean that there's no potential for harmony. In fact, sometimes difference can lead us into deeper harmony, deeper understanding through conversation, through witnessing each other within our authenticity. And an ally for this, a planetary ally, has been Venus in Aries. Venus throughout this month has been ruling the sun, which has been in Taurus throughout most of the month of May. And Venus has played a very important role. Venus in Aries teaches us that spontaneity is beautiful, that raw, honest self-expressions, including the ones that are internal, the ones that we really only share with ourselves, are valuable means of connections. Honesty opens us up to the flow of life, because honesty is the willingness to become a vessel for whatever life is presenting to us at any given moment, without too much energy being spent on trying to gauge the impact, without too much energy being spent trying to control the outcome. Honesty encourages authenticity because it breaks us out of the patterns, the grid that constitute the social matrix we've constructed. And usually we construct these matrices to keep a certain level of civility, right? To maintain the order of things, which for the most part is perhaps necessary and also can be truly restrictive in terms of allowing us to meet one another in our authenticity. And in in the case of human relating, in the case of building and weaving a life that is truly satisfying, my sense is that most of us are not particularly interested in civility. Most of us are not interested in a bunch of people gathering for our wake or our funeral saying, "Oh, he was a really nice person. She was a really nice person." That's not what most of us are interested in, right? Most of us are interested in knowing that we have fostered deep intimacy with the people around us. We are interested in cultivating containers for a relationship that are based on mutual respect, that are based on a desire for true understanding. We're not really interested in niceness for the sake of niceness, right? And so while those social matrices can be helpful to keep us in line, to prevent things from swinging back and forth between extremes, which will make it very challenging for us to actually have the kind of quiet stability that's necessary for feeling safe and therefore starting to build something true based on that feeling of safety. That rigid social matrix can be highly disruptive, and it can be highly preventative of true social connection, true intimacy, true witnessing between two people. In my own journey throughout the month, what I've also been learning is the valuable lessons that disappointment can teach us. Wherever we apply self-honesty, often the next stage is confronting our disappointment. For me, usually when I open to deeper self-honesty, at first there is a sense of relief, because prior to that we have been holding on, whether that's on a somatic level or on an emotional level. We've been holding on to a way of being that isn't truly nourishing us, that isn't truly in alignment with the flow of life. And once we are able to touch in with that self-honesty, there can be a sense of being able to finally breathe, being able to relax into the truth of the moment. And after that, sometimes disappointment and grief can really rush in pretty strongly. As I allowed myself to soften the edges, to let my guard down, to really listen to what wants to come through me, to open to that field of truth that only self-honesty can open us up into, what I began to see was that telling myself things that are untrue or only partially true is really a mechanism. It's a mechanism to keep disappointment at bay. It's often too scary for us to look at our disappointments head on. If I don't take the chances of being fully honest with myself, and perhaps by extension being fully honest with others, then I will always be protected from the potential of being disappointed, that reality isn't as I expected it to be, that others may fall short of my expectations, that there are perhaps gaps in my relationship with reality. Now, these gaps are actually where the learning happens. I'm reminded of something profound that I heard from the energy medicine teacher Francesca McCartney, who said once, "There are no mistakes in life. There's only learning." I remember being really stunned by this saying that came out of her mouth. Immediately, I recognized there's deep truth in it. And there's also kind of a confusion because so many of us really build our identity and our social standing based on this idea that we're good people, right? That we do things right, that we don't make mistakes, and that if there are mistakes, we try to make it right. And these to me are really walls that we erect to guard ourselves from experiencing disappointment. But paradoxically, disappointment leads us into the present moment truth of life. Disappointment helps us meet ourselves and other people in our full humanity without the distortion of these protective layers that we sometimes employ. And we are all familiar with these protective layers, right? For some of us, it really comes in the form of trying to be perfect as a way to cope with our insecurities. For others, it's trying to be the most responsible version of ourselves in order to obscure the reality that we are afraid. For many others still, we try to be the most successful version of ourselves in order to hide our pain. We all have our own flavors of this layer, right? Of this protection that we place between ourselves and the experience of meeting life as it arises. Disappointment is a secret gateway that opens us up to whatever it is that we refuse to see. Disappointment is a trickster. Disappointment shifts the locus of power. We want to think that we're in charge. We want to believe that we can fix things, that we can tame people, when all we really have the power to do is to be with reality itself and to be with our own experience of meeting that reality. And so at the end of the month, especially as we're contemplating the new moon in Gemini, and this new moon in Gemini is quite special, right? Because it's ruled by Mercury, and Mercury has entered Gemini, which is its home. And so this is a really potent new moon in Gemini, and the medicine is playfulness. Giving ourselves permission to not take other people's responses, and not to take life too seriously. When we take life too seriously, we are essentially creating a hologram that is frozen within a moment in time. We are taking a small moment of our experience, perhaps a challenging one or a beautiful one, and we crystallize that, we freeze that into an expectation of each time I do XYZ, I will always get this kind of result, right? And playfulness is actually part of reverence, because when we allow ourselves to be playful, we are recognizing that we don't have control over reality. In a way, playfulness is a way to remember that we are but one aspect, we are but one component of the larger grid of reality itself. In that sense, playfulness and disappointment share the same trickster quality. That maybe one can say that disappointment at its best will lead one to recognize that one has been too rigid in their relationship with life. And so rather than continuing on that path of rigidity, what if we let go of that grip? And from letting go of that grip, we come into contact with the absurdity of reality. Both playfulness and disappointment point us to humility, to right-sizing our relationship with reality. To be playful is to say, at the end of the day, I really don't know. In fact, none of us really knows anything at all. And I accept that. I accept that I am really just a player in the casino of life. Playfulness gets us out of the box that we've created. There is this really binary way of thinking and being that many of us have been imprisoned within. We think in terms of alive or dead. We think in terms of rich or poor. We think in terms of love and hate. I like this person. I really dislike this person. I like this kind of situation, but I don't like this kind of situation. And what's really curious and fascinating is that mystics throughout ages and from all kinds of different traditions speak to how wisdom as being defined as the ability to meet life in its own terms is really marked by embracing that these seemingly polar opposites, right? These seemingly opposite experiences are really just the two ends of the same spectrum, right? They're two sides of the same coin in a way. We have, Rabbi Yeshua saying things like, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Or we have the Heart Sutra, speaking about form and formlessness as being essentially the same thing, that there's no difference between them, right? That existence itself is complicated and relative, right? Something that's always struck me about stories that we've seen about these kind of enlightened beings who have walked amongst us is how they approach life with a kind of humor and a kind of neutrality. There are many instances within the Zen Buddhist tradition of these sages experiencing enlightenment, and the moment they reach enlightenment, they just could not stop laughing. One of them even woke up in the middle of the night, in the middle of their dream, and just started laughing really, really loud, and their child was freaked out by it, and was like, "Dad, are you okay?" And this, to me, this playfulness is bringing Six of Cups medicine, right? In the tarot, Six of Cups really speak to meeting our younger self with a lot of tenderness. And this isn't something that we talk a lot about when it comes to enlightenment, because enlightenment can seem like such a heavy, heady concept. But truly, the most enlightened beings amongst us are children, right? And again, speaking about Rabbi Yeshua, there is this story in what is now called the New Testament, where Rabbi Yeshua was talking about embracing children, because children are really the ones who are closest to the kingdom of God, and by embracing playfulness in whatever ways we have access to it as adults, we are really allowing ourselves to have this deep and relational reality with life itself. We are allowing ourselves to experience life as this playground, which it really is, right? In some sense, we can consider life as simply that space between birth and death, right? And an ally for this is this movement that Mercury has been making throughout the month of May, at first being in Taurus and, squaring Mars in Leo, right? This is a point of contention, a point of perhaps rigidity, thinking about Taurus and Leo both as fixed signs, moving into finally being in Gemini. Mercury is in domicile in Gemini. Mercury is at home. Mercury has access to laughter. Mercury has access to all the different tips and tricks to get things done, to move from space A to space B. So I thought this was really a poignant way to consider closing the month with laughter, with playfulness, with the act of witnessing life and reality as this absurd art exhibition that it is. We get to question reality and we get to queer reality by holding the possibility that we can't possibly know it all. As Saturn has now solidly moved into Aries, it's easy to dramatically imagine the worst, right? After all, here is the greater malefic in the sign of its fall. And to me, the invitation that the art of gazing at the skies and being in a relationship with these celestial bodies is never about that. It's never about imagining the worst. The worst will come no matter what. The worst has come before, the worst will come again. Our lives and the experience of being human is in some sense a constant cycle. It's a constant game of experiencing pleasure and success and height and radiance into experiencing despair, experiencing difficulty, experiencing challenges. That's nothing new, right? What goes up must come down. What is at the bottom must come up, right? This is what the Wheel of Fortune teaches us in the tarot. The invitation, rather, in playing with these esoteric ways of being, is to always take everything with a grain of salt. One of the things that's so cool about transits is that transits teach us that while Saturn is in Aries and having a certain kind of experience, we also have the Sun in Gemini having a different kind of experience. We have Mercury in Gemini being at home, right? And so there's always these different influences happening all at once. There are these different streams, these different insights available to us. And as energetic beings, as people who are in touch with these different streams of energy, we get to play. I like to think of us as conductors, really, of these energies, right? We get to allow astrology to not happen to us, but to happen for us. And so, what does it mean to take everything with a grain of salt while maintaining a childish heart? Saturn and Aries, to me, is the funny bone in the body. The part of our bodies where if we get hit, even just lightly, it starts to make us laugh uncontrollably. Saturn likes to be grumpy. Saturn likes to be hard. Saturn likes to be rigid. But Aries has no time for that, right? Aries is an action movie. Aries moves fast. Aries is action-oriented. So what is the role that the elder, the one who keeps the time, the one who walks around acting like they've seen it all and experienced it all, what role does this character play in an action movie? It's making me think of this quote that I've seen other astrologers also use to describe this transit, which is man plans and God laughs. Maybe we too can practice laughing alongside God. Maybe honesty or enlightenment or virtue doesn't have to be such a serious thing. Maybe it all simply unfolds when we trust in life, when we remember that we, after all, are only vessels for energy, for the universal chi, the pranic force of the universe. Maybe we're really here for the very profound reason that we only really wanted to learn the dance of being human. All right, that's it from me by way of contemplation. Just one announcement, which is that if you are interested in working with me one-on-one, I still have a few spots available at the beginning of June for the Creative Spirit reading. The Creative Spirit reading is really one where I connect with your creative spirit to receive some messages and guidance and insights about your creative path. We look at your creative body, your creative heart, and your creative source in this reading. And it's a limited time reading. By the end of June, I will no longer be doing this reading, and I will probably move on to offering a different kind of reading. And so if you are interested in receiving this reading, this will be your last chance. So book now if you're interested. Okay. Thank you so much for being here with me. I hope this has been helpful. I hope this is assisting you in some way to close out the month of May. I am sending you so much love, and I look forward to gathering here with you again. All right, take care.